All right. Hello. Hi. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited. My name is Shirley, and today I want to be talking to you about building data visualizations for product. So before we begin, why talk about it? So about 2 years ago, when I first started at Illumio, we looked out for guidance and mentorship to try and find people who might be going through similar challenges as us. And we found that we couldn't find any. We could have been just living under a rock. But in retrospect, that makes a lot of sense because product is hard to talk about. A lot of the times it's proprietary. So it might even be hard to share a screenshot, let alone some of the challenges somebody might have faced. But since I have the benefit of being able to talk about it, I would like to share with you some of the experiences that we've had, the challenges that we've faced, and the lessons that we've learned in the last 2 years, and really hope that this might offer some guidance or help if you're about to go through something similar or are going through something similar. So I work at a company called Illumio, and we create enterprise security software. And my favorite analogy for what we do is that if the traditional data center is a hotel and the firewall is that big deadbolt on the front door, then if anybody malicious gets in through the front door, then they have free-for-all access to all of your rooms. And what Illumio does instead is provides a lock for each of those hotel doors, as well as calculates who should be allowed in and out of each of those rooms. And I work on the part of the product called Illumination, which visualizes data center traffic. And this is particularly important for us because a lot of our customers have huge deployments with large numbers of rooms. And what that means for them is that they very oftentimes don't even know who might be going in and out of their rooms. And oftentimes, they also need to be able to verify that who they've given access to go in and out of those rooms are actually accurate. So while thinking about what I wanted to talk about with this talk, I've figured out some technical aspects. So building the actual visualization, building the framework around that visualization that manages the underlying data, and scaling the visualization and application, as well as some of the more human aspects of interfacing with our customers and our team. So before we begin, I want to give some key terms for Illumination. So the squares that you see are the workloads, or the rooms in my analogy. The lines are the traffic, or the people going in and out of the rooms. And each of those squares, the workloads, are grouped by their labels, what we call applications, environments, and locations. So this is the very, very first mock that our designer gave us when we first started out. It's really quite beautiful. And this is our very first implementation. So some of you, or many of you that might be familiar with the D3 force layout, might recognize that a lot of it is being used here. In particular, it's being used to calculate the positions of the workloads in each of the groups. And then, once we have the positions of those workloads, it's being used, then we calculate the dimensions of those groups based on the positions of the workloads. And then, once we have the dimensions of each of those groups, we then use the force layout again to calculate the positions of those groups alongside the floating workloads around it. So for those that are unfamiliar, the force layout is hugely computationally intensive, of something like O of n log n over thousands and thousands of iterations. And we were doing this 5, 6, 10 times on each render. And just to keep life interesting, we decided that we needed collision detection at each of those levels. So we were truly abusing the force. And this is like, I'm really excited about this slide. I hope Jim's in this room somewhere. I've been like bragging to him about it. So yeah, I hope we made Jim proud. His talk was some of our inspiration. But you could probably imagine what happened because of this. This is what we got for abusing the force. We're really sorry. So how do we fix it? We circled back, we talked to our CTO, and we figured out that actually the most intuitive way of laying out our workloads was actually by observing the ports and protocols that were running on the traffic between those workloads. Because surprisingly, that reflected the mental model our DevOps guys had of their orgs. So we went and completely stripped out the force layout from all of our code. And we implemented a layout algorithm that was designed specifically for our own needs. So this is the before and after, the before on your left and the after on your right. And this was absolutely awesome because the refactor gave us a layout algorithm that was much, much more performant. It was an O of n over one iteration, as opposed to over thousands and thousands of iterations for the force layout. And it was much more orderly because we made it so. And finally, because the algorithm was deterministic, it was able to maintain the same layout on each refresh. And that was really integral to our customer experience, to our user experience. So we learned some really important lessons, which was mainly that for building visualizations within product, we oftentimes don't have an exact data set. And we very rarely know the exact shape of all of our customers' potential data sets. But we do have the advantage oftentimes of having a closed feedback loop with our customers. In this case, it was just us because we dog food our product. And we were able to figure out what our users expected to see and what was familiar with them. And we were able to then customize and optimize our visualization based on that user feedback and expectation. And not only was that a lot more performant for us, as it turns out, it also meant that it was a lot easier for our customers to adopt from a mental model perspective. So at the very beginning, I mentioned that one of the things that I love about, or one of the things that we do is not only visualize our customers' application traffic, but also to provide ways to control the access for that application traffic. And we build a lot of workflows and features around that. So one of the main workflows we have is this. This is one of our earliest versions of the workflow for adding a rule. And so what this is showing is all of the red lines show our traffic that are not allowed for our customers. And the green lines mean that they are allowed. And this workflow encourages our users to take the action to write the rule to turn those lines green, to allow that traffic, which means that as soon as that user clicks save, they expect all of the corresponding red lines within that visualization to turn green right away without a refresh, which means that potentially each user action could be changing the visualizations in multiple places, oftentimes changing the visualization in multiple places. And we were like, oh my God. So I really, really love D3 for the fact that it gives us fine-grained control of intelligently updating the DOM. And we really tried to keep with that when we first started implementing Illumination. So we really tried to, kind of control how much we recalculated the data, as well as we cherry-picked how much and how often we touched the DOM on each of those user interactions. And that was great when we first started out because we had a pretty simple feature set. But as we added more and more features, we started having more and more user actions. So this table that you kind of see faintly in the background is actually only half of our user actions at a certain point in time about a year ago. And so all of the user actions, as well as their corresponding data recalculations, as well as their corresponding DOM re-renderings. And it became so much for us to keep track of what needs to be entered and what needs to be updated and what needs to be exited with D3, that we really just couldn't keep track of them all anymore, which meant that the more the user interacted with Illumination, the more incorrect our visualization became. And that's really not good. So we fixed it by first, we moved most of our rendering responsibilities to React, as opposed to only with pure D3. We ended up using a mix of both. But this allowed us to abstract away a lot of the managing the DOM. And we decided to recalculate everything, all data calculations on each user action. And you might say, wow, this is really counterintuitive. That must have been heavily unperformant. But we have found that because the modern browser, and because we have moved to React and Flux, and especially because of React's virtual DOM diffing, this was actually surprisingly okay. So this is what Illumination looked like, that same exact workflow of adding a rule after our refactor. So it was great for us because we stopped because we now recalculate all of the data on each user action, we no longer needed to keep track of anything. And because we used Flux's one-directional data flow, everything was really easy to reason about from an architecture and code perspective. And because we were no longer using all of our brain power to keep track of all of our updates, we could instead concentrate on delivering features. So we could do much more than we could before, and everything just kind of worked. So we learned here that managing underlying data, especially data that is constantly changing with each user action, is one of the biggest, hardest challenges of building data visualizations for a product. And for us, we made the mistake of optimizing prematurely. And from there, we learned to instead start just with a very stupidly simple approach when we're starting with our architecture. And then once it has had the time to kind of just marinate and soak in the code base, then we can start figuring out exactly where the optimizations are needed. So thus far, everything I have shown you had been for relatively reasonable numbers. But a lot of our customers don't have reasonable numbers. They have huge numbers. So at one point in time, our customers' deployments started to look like this. So that's kind of fun, but not really great for user experience. And so the first thing we did was we figured out that probably the most straightforward thing to do is to just reduce the number of data being rendered on the screen. And we did this by aggregating each of the workloads by their respective groups, and then by their location labels. And then we filtered down, we filtered away anything that wasn't relevant as the user was drilling down. And this is actually our dog food environment. And this worked really well for us. This isn't that big of a number, but what this did was it meant that, and this is what it looked like after refactor. And this was much, much more visually appealing, one. And two, it significantly lightened the cognitive load on our users because they no longer had to dig through those spaghetti lines. And then three, it was a lot better for our browser. But what we started to notice as we got bigger and bigger in our numbers with our customers was that even though the pretty picture would draw, every user action, a drag, a pan, a zoom, a click, started to lag. And that makes a lot of sense because we were recalculating everything on every single user action. So this is my favorite, absolute favorite part. We went in and we got crazy with the Google performance tools. So we figured out three main things among a bunch of other ones. But the first thing we did was we figured out what was the biggest current roadblock of what was slowing our calculations down, of what was slowing Illumination down. And we, surprisingly, hindsight 2020, found out that because our data stores were using arrays, the lookups on those arrays were slowing us down significantly at larger numbers. So we just replaced arrays with objects in the data stores. And then the second thing we went in to figure out was what was the next most expensive operation. And we learned that it was actually calculating whether the lines should be red or green. And so we figured out where that could be moved to, which was on each time the data was loaded from the backend after some user action of adding a rule or changing a rule. And then we did similar things with all of the other places where we figured out what was least performant, and we stopped recalculating those on each user action also. And finally, we took a look at what was the most memory, which data structures were the most memory intensive. And we figured out how much of the data fit calculations we could move to the backend. We moved as much as we could to the backend. And then we only loaded just enough data to render what's needed on the screen. And this meant that everything became much smoother, much snappier, happier, both us and the product. And we could support much larger numbers than before. So the important lesson we learned here is that we very rarely know exactly the shape of the data our customers are going to have, which is probably why optimizing prematurely fails so miserably for us. But what we should do instead is to figure out what is slowing us down, only when it's slowing us down, and do the optimizations based on what we've learned, the results we've learned and gathered from the profile tools that we've run. And we're still working on scaling. It's an ongoing process. We've been learning a lot. And we just keep swimming. We just keep swimming. I had to add that. It's an aquarium. Oh my God, okay. I just hope you guys will really like it. So thus far, I've talked a majority about the technical challenges that we've gone through. But I think it's really also very important to talk about the human aspects as well. So we've been very fortunate in that we've been able to have very tight feedback loops with our customers for the last 2 years. And we noticed two things, two primary things, which was that when we first started, we were largely selling our product. And so none of our customers really were, using Illumination that much, which meant that a lot of our features, all of our features were put in based on needs of the demo and feedback that we got on those demos, which meant that we were building for customer wants as opposed to their needs. And in the last 2 years, as we've gotten more and more customers installed and using Illumination, we've started to see the patterns emerge of how they're using Illumination, which means that we've started to be able to kind of hone in on their workflows and start simplifying the feature set of Illumination. And that's really important to us because in product with customers, there's always edge cases. Because we'll build something, Illumination, for a data set that we're pretty sure that our customers should have it shaped like this, hopefully. And it works for most of our customers, yay. And then there will come a customer that will come along, and then they have data shaped like nothing we ever expected. And then suddenly, boom, we have, like support tickets and fire drills. So at one point in time when we first started working on scaling our product, we made the assumption that we should optimize for the number of workloads. That seemed pretty reasonable. And then over a period of time, we started getting all these support tickets filed on us about Illumination freezing at really small number of workloads, 10, 15, 20, things that we were supposed to be able to support reasonably easily. And then when we started digging in, we realized that it was because the data wasn't just going to grow and scale over the number of workloads. There was other places of complexity also. For example, some of our customers that froze Illumination had huge numbers of ports and protocols running between some of their workloads. Or we would be tracking large numbers of IP addresses for their IP lists. So as we've scaled and as we've gotten bigger in what we can handle with Illumination, it's become increasingly more important to be able to really understand the needs of our customers and cut out any unnecessary features, or else edge cases and everything blowing up over and over. And so the lesson we learned here was that when we build for product, there's obviously different customers that have, some customers that have small data sets and some customers that have large, huge data sets. And we need to be able to accommodate both of them for Illumination. So we've learned that we need to take advantage of that tight feedback loop and figure out what's important in their use cases and work towards a visualization and an application that can be flexible, that can handle all of those situations. And the most important to be able to do that is to always make sure to get and use real data as often and as early as possible. And if we can't get real data from our customers, then to simulate their data as closely as possible, because only then can we make informed decisions about their needs for their use cases. So when we first started with Illumination, we had 2 front-end engineers working on it full-time. We are now a cross-functional team of front-end, back-end, QA, design, product, project managers, most of us working full-time on this project. And that's really, absolutely, really cool. But despite all of this emphasis and importance that's been placed on visualization within our product, sometimes it's still surprisingly difficult to get immediate buy-in on new ideas of visualization. And I think that's because of two primary reasons. That one, no matter how brilliant our team is, because they are, sometimes the visualizations that we propose are absolutely esoteric. Like, we might think that parallel coordinates and Sankey diagrams make so much sense to us, but when we pitch it to our teammates that have never seen it before, it's hard for them to understand what it is, let alone what it's supposed to do or should do, or how that data will look, how our data will look within that visualization, let alone what the use case or the customer need is for that visualization. And second, Illumination is quite novel. I've been told oftentimes that the security industry, because the UI isn't that sexy, has never really seen something like this before. Some of my favorite stories are of our customers seeing their networks visualized for the first time and going, huh, that's our dev, and that's our prod, and there's a line between them that shouldn't be there. Let me talk to our DevOps guys. And that interaction is really, really cool. That story is really cool. But it also means that sometimes our team doesn't know where we should be going, because our customers don't even really know what they want or need from us, or where we should be going. So the lesson, and I think that's actually quite exciting. And the way that we've gotten around that is by, one, when we don't know where we should be going, encourage prototyping. We made prototyping really easy for ourselves, where all we have to do is to drop a hidden page into our application. And then it has access to all of our resources of, functions, like our data calculation functions, our rendering functions. And it means that when we have an idea for a visualization, it's relatively inexpensive to just go and prototype for a few days, come back to our team and say, hey, that idea I had, this is what it looks like with our data. And now our team can use that prototype and make an informed decision of whether or not it is important or valuable for it to go into our product. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it makes it into the product. And sometimes it isn't. But that's also okay, because then we've taken the time to explore what's out there and our options that we could potentially use in a future use case. And when we didn't know where we needed to go. So in the past 20 minutes or so, I've kind of just dumped all these stories and experiences onto you. And to recap, so first, customize and optimize the visualization based on user expectation and feedback. Second, don't pre-optimize, but rather start with a stupidly simple approach when it comes to the framework architecture around the visualization. Third, only optimize when we hit the performance roadblock, and then optimize based on the data we gather. And always get and use real data as often and as early as possible. And when we don't know what to do, always prototype and always explore. So for the past 2 years, I've learned so much from all of these experiences. And if I can boil it down to some of the just most important points for me, it's been to be flexible, both in the product, because we never know what kind of data our customers can throw at us, and also to be flexible in the process so that we can explore when necessary, but not all the time. And perhaps the most important to me is be willing to throw things out, refactor, and don't don't get attached to any one prototype or iteration. And I fully believe that the team that can do this is the most important, because I fully believe that it is because of our team and our beliefs and our culture that we built that has taken Illumination to where we are today. So at the very beginning, I mentioned that there was kind of not as many resources that we could find in terms of giving us guidance on how to build visualizations within the product. So I've compiled a survey. And if you've had these experiences of building for a product, please help by filling this out, because what I've talked about is only one perspective. And I'm really, really hoping to compile a multitude of perspectives into a write-up of sort of like a mistakes made and lessons learned. And in the meanwhile, please join our Slack channel called DataVis and Product, because we're trying to really foster maybe like a kind of a community support group, because I'm pretty sure that I'm not alone in this. So thank you very much. That's all that I can think to say. And the GIFs, reject GIFs.